Now, before we go live in any of these cases, there are a lot of stories going on in the news today, a lot of other stories. So we have a short report about that right now.
Here are today's top crime stories trending on Law&Crime.com and across the country. Authorities in Illinois have released 2 facial recognition images of unidentified victims of serial killer John Wayne Gacy. Gacy was convicted of killing 33 young men and stashing their bodies in his Cook County home. Gacy was executed for his crimes in 1994. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released the images of John Doe number 10 and John Doe number 13 in the hopes of finally identifying these victims. Authorities in Los Angeles released ballistic tests that showed the lone fatal casualty of the Trader Joe's shooting was killed by a shot fired by LAPD. 27-year-old Melida Corrado, who worked at Trader Joe's, was shot and killed during the 2-hour hostage situation this weekend. Authorities initially believed the suspect, 28-year-old Jean Even Atkins, was responsible for Corrado's killing. Atkins reportedly was arguing with his 76-year-old grandmother when he shot her, setting off the police chase, which ended with Atkins taking hostages at the Trader Joe's. Atkins was booked on 1 count of murder and is being held on $2 million bond. Disgraced comedian Bill Cosby has met the requirements to be classified as a sexually violent predator in an opinion handed down by the Pennsylvania Sexual Offenders Assessment Board. Prosecutors have submitted a motion to the overseeing judge to set a final determination hearing on the matter. Cosby, who has been accused of sexual misconduct by over 60 women, was convicted of sexually assaulting Andrea Constant at his home in Pennsylvania in 2004. Cosby could face up to 30 years in prison when sentenced in September. Those were today's top crime stories. I'm Anthony Velez for Law & Crime.
Thank you, Anthony. You can go to lawandcrime.com to look up the other trending stories of the day. But I want to talk about that Bill Cosby case. I mean, this is someone to talk about. So joining me right now, we're very happy to have him via Skype, criminal defense attorney Gary Gerstenfield. Gary, it's good to see you.
Hey, Jesse. Good to see you as always.
So I'm not sure what the big deal is here. We got Cosby, who's 80 years old, faces up to 30 years in prison. Why is it a big deal that he could be classified as a sexually violent predator?
It's a report that came out, and in terms of any debate about it, no. He's going to have to register as a violent sex offender. He's going to have to register at the highest level. So there are different tiers of registration depending on the nature of the conviction that you have. And he's going to have to register as at the highest level, which means that he'll have the greatest level of supervision under what's called SORNA, which obligates him to basically maintain a high level of compliance in terms of his registration obligations.
But is this all if he were to get out of prison early?
I'm sorry?
Is this really a matter if he gets out of prison early? Is that really all that matters? If he should be released, this is what his life would be like?
Yes. While he's in prison, his obligation would be no different than anybody else serving time. But once he's released from prison, he'll have to immediately register. And that's separate and apart from any obligation he has as part of a probation contract.
Okay, so from a practical point of view, let's say he doesn't get sentenced to 30 years, because if he were to get sentenced for 30 years, most likely he would die in prison. But let's say he gets something in between, 10 years, 15 years, 90, 95 years old, gets out of prison. Is this a possibility? Am I thinking about this correctly? Or really, is he going to be sentenced to 30 years and this really doesn't matter?
He's going to get a sentence of something less than 30 years. I think that's clear. Even the attorney, the Montgomery County District Attorney, the prosecuting attorney, Kevin Steele, has indicated he's not asking for 30 years. So the amount of time he actually is going to get, even being asked, is going to be significantly less than that. And of course, there's already a very strong indication in the fact that he's still on bail, that he'll probably be permitted to stay. I mean, this is the big issue, was whether he'll be able to remain outside of jail pending his appeals. So during that period of time, assuming he doesn't get locked up after sentencing, during that window of time while these appeals are winding their way through the court system, he will have to comply with all the conditions that are going to be imposed of him as a violent sex offender.
Well, it's not a good day to be Bill Cosby, I'll tell you that much. Gary, stand by. We have an update. We are live right now in the James Colley courtroom out of Florida. The closing arguments have begun. This is the end of the sentencing phase. What will happen to James Colley? Let's go live and find out. Prosecution's closing argument. I want to bring in Gary Gerstenfield to talk a little bit more about it, and then we'll go back live into the courtroom after our short break. Gary, he is painting a very strong picture of the horror of that shooting. Is it resonating, in your opinion, is it resonating in the minds of the jury?
Very much so, because what he's doing is he's trying to show this in a very meticulous, very detailed, and strangely enough, not in a very emotional way. He's trying to add up the numbers and show why, when you do the math, this is a death penalty case, which makes a lot of sense, particularly in a case like this, because the emotional part of it we've already been through with the actual conviction to these charges. Now we're trying to approach this, or he's trying to approach this, and methodically in an effort to show that mechanically this adds up to death penalty.
Right, and we need those aggravating factors to outweigh the mitigating factors in order to get a death penalty recommendation. That's the law. And again, playing that 911 phone call for the jury, again, is really impactful, in my opinion, and we're going to have to analyze it a little bit more. Now, Gary, I want you to stand by. We'll take a quick break here, and when we come back, we're going to jump back into that courtroom because we don't want you to miss anything, including the defense's closing argument, because you know that they're going to talk about that prescription medication and what effect that had on their client. And maybe it's enough to convince one juror that this man should not be sentenced to death. We'll be right back. Prosecutor hammering away against the defendant. Want to bring in Gary Gerstenfield to talk about this closing argument. Gary, how do you separate first-degree premeditated murder cases where there is no death penalty and here where there might be a situation where they do impose the death penalty? What's the jury thinking here? How do you separate it?
In this case, the major problem that the defense is going to have, and I think you made a good point about the hammering away, is when you think about the text messages, which to me, again, it shows the change in the way prosecution works now because of all this new scientific or technical evidence we didn't have before, which you can sort of go back in time and see what people are thinking or doing by their text messages. Right. And that's very powerful. The concealment that you have, the protective order that he violated, all those things come together, I think, to really push hard on the prosecutor's argument that this is a death penalty case. And what would be the difference? How do you parse it out when you don't have those things?
And I think you said it right, because yesterday we heard so much from the prosecution about how he knew what he was doing. Take away all that prescription medication talk. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. To some very interesting territory. I want to bring back in Gary Gerstenfield. Okay, so the prosecutor made a really good point. I want your thoughts on it. Here he said, listen, the only person that said that he took all this medication that affected his state was the defendant. And that's what the doctors are basing their opinion on. That's a big point, right?
The ambient defense is a silly defense. There's no indication at all that he was truly under the effect of the medication. The behavior that he's doing, all of the language, the text, everything he's doing is not suggestive of somebody that's seriously impaired. And voluntary intoxication is not a defense, it's not even an argument that you're allowed to make.
Well, we'll have to see. I really can't wait for the defense to begin their closing argument and see which way they frame it. And I love this back and forth, the battle of the experts yesterday when we saw different psychiatric experts coming on. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But we have to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're jumping right into the James Colley courtroom. Stay tuned. You don't want to miss anything. Of the victims right there, presenting it to the jury in the closing argument by the state. Let's bring back on Gary Gerstenfield. Gary, one interesting aspect that the prosecutor brought up, and I want to talk to you about it, is that, you say he's a parent, you say he was a happy guy, you show all these photos of him. He said he had every opportunity in the world to be a law-abiding citizen, and he violated it. What do you think?
The important thing that he has to do is he's got the biggest defense that that James Colley has going for him is the fact that if he gets a death penalty, he's going to make the kids will be orphans. So combating that is, you brought this on yourself. You had everything to live for, and these children that you care so much about. Obviously, you didn't care about them when you killed their mother. You're a horrible human being. And what the point of that is, the prosecutors got to push away from the mind.
Yeah.
A very strong reality.
It's a tricky set of circumstances. Gary, I know we have to sign you off. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.